factory towns, capitalist fiefdoms, and corporate feudalism. All right, guys, hello and welcome to another episode of Thinking Out Loud. Today we're going to try to dissect a very broad topic, an all-encompassing topic. We're going to try to examine some of the power structures that have been developing in the corporate world. We're going to examine how some of these corporate structures may evolve in the future and in what ways these power structures might shape the future. Anybody who watches this show is keenly aware at the power that corporations have been building, the insidious ways that they have bought and paid for the United States government, have bought and paid for governments all around the world, the way that they go to the third world and hyper exploit the people, the communities, the nations there. We've seen quite clearly multiple incidents of some of these corporations, Amazon, Tesla, Google, the way that they have set up monopolies and use their wealth and their garnered political power to set up almost quasi-states within the United States and within other countries. So I know that's like a huge topic, but we've got like 3 different articles here that we're going to examine. We're going to, walk through, we're going to read some and discuss a little bit and try to paint a succinct and clear image of how these power structures work and where they're heading. And without further ado, let's jump into this first article right here. Amazon's new factory towns will lift the working class. Plentiful new jobs at higher wages in places with cheaper housing sounds like a solution to inequality. You already know this is going to be a good one. All right, let's get this, guys. Says here, the campaign against economic inequality has put a bullseye on cities. Local governments are encouraged to raise minimum wages, change their zoning laws, and build more housing, particularly in affluent communities that are squeezing out the lower class. Gentrification, everybody loves that. But what if you shifted that focus to a different kind of community? Consider these burgeoning new places strung along the interstate and other highways leading away from urban cores, populated by warehouses and fulfillment centers that are being built to serve the needs of e-commerce customers. Let's call them factory towns. And a lot of us already know the history of factory towns, and we know it was a great idea, and it worked out just fine for everybody, didn't it? Going on with this here, guys. These are places where working class jobs are being created in large numbers, and where wages are already rising. They're not much in the spotlight yet, but making these modern day company towns more livable for the working class might be a better approach to solving inequality, with a higher likelihood of success than continuing to fight against entrenched interests in coastal cities and high-cost parts of metro areas. So that is quite a take. I'm wondering what fucking think tank came up with this, huh? Let's give up, is what they're saying. Oh, these coastal cities, these urban centers. There's nothing we can do. The gentrification's going to happen. We're barking up the wrong tree. We're gritting and gnashing our teeth trying to climb ourselves out of these holes. Why don't we just abandon the cities? Let's just abandon the cities. Let's abandon trying to do a minimum wage. Let's abandon affordable housing within the cities. Let's just let the gentrification happen. These guys got too much money. So here's what we can do. We'll move you out of the city where you've lived your whole life, where, your personality, your sense of identity is roped up in the neighborhood, where all the cultural institutions are. We're going to move you out of the city because we got a lot of real estate developers. They got a great vision for the apartment you're in. They're going to tear it all out on the inside and put in some, cheap drywall with some nice paint, maybe like a light blue. They're going to get new fixtures in there. Like, sure, the fixtures are going to be cheap. Maybe they'll fall off a week later. But at first, it's going to look nice. And we're going to move in all these technocrats. Okay, so you got to get the fuck out of here. But we're not going to leave you on the street because homelessness is bad for business too. You know what I'm saying? So here's our idea. We're going to take you and your family and all your friends and everybody, everybody that's working class. I mean, you could have gone to college. You chose not to. Okay? We're going to take you and we're going to move you about 20 miles out of the city. Okay? But we don't want you in the city because You're poor. You smell like the factory. You smell like the restaurants, all right? We don't want you here. But what we're going to do is we're going to set up a whole fucking city out here for you. And it's going to be great. You're going to love it. You're going to have a nice tenement housing. You know, Amazon will own that. We're going to have a series of restaurants. We'll have a fucking Whole Foods for you. You're going to love it. All right, let's go on with this, guys. Economic realities dictate where these facilities get built. The need for speedy deliveries makes it important to be close to large concentrations of customers. But because the facilities require so much land, hundreds of thousands of square feet or more, they tend to be on the outskirts of cities where land is abundant and cheap. Highway proximity is a must so that trucks can quickly get in and out. These warehouses also provide jobs to large numbers of people. An 800,000 square foot Amazon building employs between 1,000 and 1,500 full-time workers. So when you have multiple large warehouses operated by different companies packed alongside both sides of the highway in close proximity, you can be talking about a cluster employing many thousands of workers. So yeah, here we go. You guys were complaining about jobs. We got them. They just ain't going to be in the city. There ain't going to be no urban renewal or none of that shit. Okay? That's a waste of fucking time and money. We already got the jobs that are outside of the city. We're going to put you out there. We're going to get you a decent paying job so that you can barely get by. It's going to be fucking great. And you know, that's the thing. Economic realities dictate where these facilities get built. As if economic reality doesn't affect and control enough of your life, we might as well take it to the next level. Now, economic realities can decide de facto, no matter what, where you live. And this is where you get to live. Right next to the highway. With a whole spread of tenement housing all around you. A Chipotle, maybe. Maybe it'll be a Chipotle down the block or a Starbucks. That's fucking great. And over all the tenement housings and the Starbucks and maybe the Target, there'll be a giant looming Amazon factory. Like a great Leviathan. Like the castle of the feudal lords. And it'll fill you with pride and dignity knowing that you, sir, are serving your lord and master, Jeff Bezos. That's what we have for you. This is our re-envisioning of society, and we know that you're going to love it. I mean, you know, we've talked about gentrification before on this channel. You know how it works. They find ways to evict people from houses, and then they do them up a little bit, and then they, move in professional level, working class people, technocrats, pencil pushers, bureaucrats, all that shit. You know, they put a Starbucks here, they put a fucking Whole Foods there. They put an Apple store in there, and then before you know it, the community, the neighborhood there in an urban center that, might have been a little rough around the edges, but had some character. It had people from all over the world, and it had diversity, cultural, religious diversity. Before you know it, it's all suddenly whitewashed, and you got a bunch of Beckys and Karens running around, and there's not a black person to be seen. We've talked about gentrification before. Everybody knows what it is, how it works. But this here that they're talking about is just brazen relocation, advocating for a brazen relocation of all working people. It's sweeping away what little barriers remain for gentrification and just, putting it on steroids, putting it on fast track. This is really, when you envision it, taking all the working class service people out of the city, out of the apartments, out of the few remaining bastions of working class neighborhoods in there, and you're just moving them out. It's really the last stage of gentrification. This is how they envision it. It's all the technocrats and bureaucrats and professional class living in the city, having the amenities, blah, 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 and all the poor peasant folks living outside of the city. The dirty peasant folks outside of the city. Put them in the countryside next to the highway. We don't want to see them. The only time I want to see these poor working fucks is when they're giving me my goddamn latte. They don't got to ride the subways with them. They don't got to rub elbows with them. Other than maybe at the end of the day when they're all commuting out of the fucking city. I mean, that's what this amounts to. It's a pretty clear-cut case of expedited gentrification. All right, guys, going on here. Now consider Amazon's announcement this week that it's making another big hiring push as its fulfillment centers with jobs paying an average starting wage of $18 an hour. What a great wage. Up 20% since 2018. Thinking about the growth of fulfillment and distribution centers in general, maybe these highway warehouse communities with jobs that pay increasingly respectable. I like that word. Not a living wage, but it's respectable. You're getting close. Wages are the future of the working class. Maybe this is what the future of the working class should look like. And doesn't it make sense then to think about how we can make these communities better for the people who will live and work there? People can live close to their work with shorter commutes. Plus the possibility of employer-provided shuttle buses. No public transportation. Let's privatize that. That'll be great. Might as well. The city already owns, the company already owns the whole city. Why not the buses and the fucking subways, huh? When their jobs are in a cheaper, less crowded part of a metro area, if there's a push to increase density by building affordable apartments or townhomes for workers, there's less likely to be wealthy homeowners mobilizing to stop it. Since those sorts of homeowners probably will live closer to the city core. Like I was saying, we're going to keep the rich people in the city. That's where they belong. It's not where you belong. As wages rise and more jobs are created at warehouses and distribution hubs, you'll get a secondary increase in economic activity as amenities like retail and dining are built close by to appeal to the workforce. Oh, man. 18 an hour, guys. You're not going to be able to live in your neighborhood that you've lived in for decades, that your family's lived in. Maybe you've been in that neighborhood for generations. I know it sucks to give up all that history, but you're going to get 18 an hour, guy. We're going to set up amenities for you. Like I said, you're going to have a Whole Foods. We'll build a fucking tobacco outlet if you like to smoke. We'll put some, we can't have any like individual small businesses like dive bars, but, we'll put a fucking B-dubs in there. $9 for a fucking margarita. With that $18 an hour, you'll be able to afford that, man. You might be able to have a margarita every day after work if you pinch your pennies on other shit. The main thing is we'll give you all the amenities you want. As long as it's owned by Amazon or Google or whoever the giant corporation is that built the city. We're trying to keep that money in our community. In our Amazon community because we care. Shop fucking local. Shop local, guys. Yeah, it's Amazon, but it's still fucking local. You're keeping that money in your community. It's fucking efficient. It's good for your neighbors. You guys are going to love this. But, sarcasm aside, this just makes me think of like, you've probably seen this meme here where it's like, kids never want to go outside anymore. And then it's like the outside they built, and it's just fucking chain restaurant and chain shopping center and a fucking car wash and all this shit on broken, shitty cement and asphalt. This is the corporate class's envisionment of community. To them, this is their vision of fucking utopia. And you'll hear people cry wolf and get all scared and terrified when they see, Soviet era tenement housing and communal meeting spaces and all this, and they're like, oh, that's so ugly and hideous. Look at the fucking communities we've built, man. It's not even dystopic. Dystopic to me would be something like out of Blade Runner. Like, at least it fucking looks cool. It's dark and scary, but it fucking looks cool. This is the dystopia we've gotten right here. It's fucking hideous. It's not even scary looking. It's just boring and terrible. And this is what they want for the whole world, for the whole civilization, man, is they want community after community, and they already have for the most part, but they want community after community after community of these fucking urban sprawl neighborhoods that are just like something out of a fucking shopping magazine. And then they want the urban centers where all the nice buildings with the history and all this shit, they just want all the people of color and all the ethnically diverse, but they want them fucking out. This is for the whites. This is for the white bureaucratic class. This is what they want. And even those neighborhoods in the urban center, they're going to tear down anything that cannot be yielded a profit to renovate, and then they're going to put that 1 to 5 fucking architecture. Those fucking drab ass apartments that they look nice because they're new, and they look clean because they're new, but these fuckers fall apart within a decade. This is their vision of the world. This is the vision that they're trying to create for us. And they get us hyped on it with consumerism and shit. Oh, this is great. Isn't this great? You can have everything you want. There's a Starbucks in every fucking corner. It's sad. It's not even scary. It's just fucking boring. I'd take like I said, I'd take a Blade Runner multi-ethnic slum with neon and crazy outfits and Chinese letters, Korean letters, and Mexican or Spanish letters and shit. I take a neighborhood like that as my dystopia over whatever the fuck it is they're building here. All right. These new factory towns will presumably have new issues that need addressing, such as adequate amounts of housing, schools, and healthcare facilities. But the point is that we need to be thinking about what sorts of communities are being created by the growth of U.S. e-commerce infrastructure and what they'll need to thrive. To urbanists contemplating the potential of the area surrounding Interstate 75 in Ocala, Florida, outside of Orlando might not be as sexy as upzoning and building transit in San Francisco, but it's these types of new communities that are going to be the future of a large segment of the working class. That's just a fun take. Affordable housing and upzoning and building transit, public amenities. It's not a civic virtue. It's not a societal essential. It's a sexy want and desire. It's a sexy thing to want a functioning urban center. Jesus Christ. And like I was saying towards the, I mentioned in passing at the beginning of this. I mean, these are factory towns. That's what they even call them. They're factory towns. And I love how they're trying to paint it like it's this new, wondrous, innovative thing that Google and Amazon and all these fucking things. We've come up with a solution that no one's ever thought of. We'll move the poor people out of the city and we'll put them right next to their work, as if this isn't something that's already been done. And it was a fucking nightmare for working class people. I mean, if you haven't, take some time to look into the history of factory towns. It was fucked up, and they painted up with words like affordable housing and decent wages. I mean, they did the same thing back then. They built row after row after row after row after row of tenement housing. There's some in my town here. We have a huge cement plant, 2 cement plant facilities. And there's an area, the company's called Lehigh, and there's an area like this, a small version of a company town, of a factory town. It was called Lehigh Row. It was just tenement housing, tenement housing, tenement housing. They had a few fucking bars and shops, and the leases on those were, I don't know for sure, but presumably owned by the company as well. I mean, this is something we've tried before, and it was disastrous for working people. It smashed their right to organize. I mean, you'd be essentially evicted out of your home if you tried to unionize. They suppressed wages, and you had no other choice because all the jobs in the area were owned by the company. I mean, it was a disaster, and it ended in outright revolt from working people that costed hundreds of lives over the years. And it's sickening to me that they're painting it like it's something new. And I wonder, I mean, the ego of these people is so big and they are so out of touch that, I mean, you could make the argument that, they know what they're doing and they're just trying to push us back to the factory town model. They already know how it goes. But part of me doubts that. Part of me really thinks they don't fucking understand because they're so disconnected. They're so caught up in their ego that they really think this is something new and exciting and that's going to change the world for the better. And I mean, that's the whole attitude here, is they cannot distinguish the fact, and I'm sure some know, but they can't distinguish the fact that, they tell you, they want you to think, and they think it themselves, that what is good for the shareholder is good for you, man. When Jeff Bezos is pushing close to $1 trillion in wealth, that's good for you, man. That's that trickle down. These cities are going to be good for you. These chain restaurants that puts all your favorite places out of business, it's fucking good. Walmart, it's good. All this is good. The bottom line is good. It makes society better. I mean, that's literally what the whole premise of our society has been built on now. It's disturbing. But that's about the size of that article here, guys. But I want to drop into this. I have a couple definitions for you as pertaining in relation to this factory town concept that these fuckers are pushing. Fiefdom. Maybe it's a word you've heard if you've studied medieval history. Fiefdom. Definition of fiefdom: an area over which someone exercises control as or in the manner of a feudal lord. Let's see. In conjunction with fiefdom, the root of the word here, fief. A fief was the central element of feudalism. It consisted of heritable property or rights granted by an overlord to a vassal who held it in fealty, or in fee, quote unquote, in return for a form of feudal allegiance and service, usually given by the personal ceremonies of homage and fealty. The fees, and this is the important part, were often lands or revenue-producing real property held in feudal land tenure. These are typically known as fiefs or fiefdoms. However, right here, guys, not only land, but anything of value could be held in fee or fief, including governmental office, rights of exploitation such as hunting or fishing, monopolies in trade, and tax farms. Anything of value could be held in fee, including government office, right of exploitation such as hunting or fishing, or monopolies in the trade or tax farms. So that's the definition of a fief, of a vassal region under the feudal system. And now obviously it's a little bit different. Although you could argue that agriculture is still done essentially in the form of a fiefdom, with, you know, giant multinational corporations owning the arable land and having peasant workers that are essentially tied. I mean, really, that still exists. But what we're talking about here with these factory towns for distribution centers, for certain factories, I mean, we've seen it in the past, like I said, with a cement producing town, a brick and tile producing town, a meat processing town, a packing town. That's what this is. It's a version of corporate feudalism where a company like Amazon, you've heard about Google also talking about this, building a Google town where these companies own the entire city, like a fiefdom, right? You could imagine in this scenario, rather than it being a king, a monarch with his vassals in control of the fiefs underneath him, the king, the godhead, the emperor, isn't necessarily an individual. It's wealth, the golden calf, the golden bull, if you will. Right, that is the divine, right to rule, the divine right of wealth to rule at the top. And underneath it, you have the money god's fiefs, the money god's vassals, Amazon, Google, Tyson Smithfield, whatever it may be. And as we'll see here in a little bit, it's not just arable land and means of production of value that these fiefs, that these vassal companies essentially own. They've carved up fiefs in law enforcement, in the justice system, in the legal system, in the government. And that leads me to our next article here, talking about what we're having a discussion about. The rise of Neo-Feudalism. The private capture of entire legal systems by corporate America goes far beyond neoliberalism. It evokes the private fiefdoms of the Middle Age. And with this article, we're going to touch on how we've come, full circle. If you look at the history of human political development, the first major civilizations were slaveholding empires, the Egyptians, the Romans, the Greeks, things like that, right? As that system began to collapse, we started to develop the system of feudalism, right? Where a king put vassals and essentially, warlords or shogunates in Japan underneath of him to manage the land and to help in common defense, right? As that began to be weakened in European Middle Ages, it was the bubonic plague played a big role in that. We began to see the divine right of kings to rule, where the monarch really began to centralize government. The fiefdoms still had a lot of power and the nobility played an integral role in administration, government defense, and things like that. But you began to see the divine right of the king, of the monarch to rule. And then obviously you go into the age of exploration, age of enlightenment, and you see that system begin to crumble. And that's where we see really the inception and the breeding or the brooding of capitalism that would later lead to like empires like the British Empire, the trading empire of the British, and obviously the outright formed as such American empire, which was rooted in capitalism. And now, as we are beginning to see late stage capitalism, the disintegration of the institutions that made capitalist republican society, if you will, possible, we're seeing a reversion or a de-evolution of the capitalist system back into a feudal system where the capitalist corporations are the new nobility. But yeah, guys, let's jump into this one here. The history of modern democratic state can be understood as a story of shifting authority and lawmaking, first from private potentates to sovereign monarchs, and then to publicly accountable democracies. Today, this centuries-long democratizing trend is rapidly being reversed. Western democracies are not simply embracing neoliberalism in the sense of deregulating the economy. Elites are pursuing something aptly described as a new form of feudalism, in which entire realms of public law, public property, due process, and citizen rights revert to unaccountable control by private business. And just joking to myself when I was writing out the script or whatever, the direction for this video, I just imagined, Bezos sitting in his fucking, one of his many palaces. And maybe for whatever reason, he's found an interest in the high Middle Ages, and he's been, starting to study that time period and the church and the nobility and all this shit. And he comes across the painting of all the peasants in the field and the giant castle looming over it, and he's like, these guys had a great fucking idea. And he sets out to make it happen in the real world. I mean, obviously, it's not like that. It's just sort of a trend. This is how things go. There's trends that start to develop, and before you know it, they're snowballing and they get away from you. But this article, if you want to read it, I'll put the link in the comment box because we're only going to touch on some of it. But it really succinctly describes or analyzes the sort of system decay that I'm talking about, that I'm trying to discuss in this video, and really makes you understand the gravity of this situation, how long it's been going on, and maybe even where it's heading. All right, guys. The system of finance, once supervised by bank regulatory agencies and the Securities and Exchange Commission, has been delegated to private realms of law. The financial collapse of 2008 is best understood as the seizure, corruption, and abuse of entire domains of regulation and jurisprudence. Laws to protect workers and consumers, reflecting 70 years of struggle to expand rights, are now erased by compulsory arbitration regimes. Trade law permits similar to private tribunals to overturn or sidestep public regulation. Tech platform monopolies have created a proprietary regime where they can crush competitors and invade consumer privacy by means of onerous terms, often buried in online terms of service provisions. The unity of common scientific inquiry has been balkanized by confidentiality agreements and abuses of patents as scientific knowledge comes to be owned by private entities. Companies like Monsanto, manipulating intellectual property and trade law, prevent farmers from following the ancient practice of keeping seeds for the next planting season. This is not deregulation or neoliberalism. It is legally sanctioned private jurisprudence, Neo-Feudalism. So yeah, that's it, guys. Like I was saying, before in the Middle Ages, particularly in the High Middle Ages, these fiefdoms were focused on the then means of production: arable land, water, maybe a mine. You'd have a vassal, warlord nobility governing that region autocratically. Obviously, as technology has advanced, what constitutes the means of production has changed. It's no longer just arable land, but as they talked about in that with Monsanto copywriting living organisms, the classic sense of the fiefdom, like we talked about earlier as well, on the arable land where you have a planter state and peasants working underneath it. That exists, and it's gone on into the digital age. But fiefdoms now cover all sorts of things, even going into law. Copyright over technology, like the vaccine's a good example. These pharmaceuticals companies, they have a fiefdom over vaccinations, over inoculations. They have a fiefdom over insulin, cancer treatments, opiates, whatever it may be. That's their little fiefdom. You know, medical supply, information, i.e. Google, law, regulation, where these giant corporations have cemented their fiefdom, their vassal state, by bankrolling politicians or having a politician appoint a bureaucrat, a regulatory czar, you know, somebody that's beholden to them. Meanwhile, they're there to, you know, they're supposed to be there to check the unchecked power of these corporations. Meanwhile, they've carved out this political state within a society. You know, finance, private schooling, all of this stuff. These are fiefdoms. You know, tiny little kingdoms that these corporations, that these billionaires have created for themselves in the rotting corpse of a decaying empire. Really. And the same thing happened in ancient Rome as the Roman Empire began to steadily decay more and more quickly, and the state apparatus and the army no longer had the control that it had. You would have some of the wealthiest Romans go off into the countryside and create their own fief, and that's really where the system of feudalism started to burgeon or seed itself. And really, that's what you're starting to see here. Is as the American empire decays, as the social and political and legal systems continue to rot, continue to become skeletal in their dominion and their ability to achieve order and actually institute law, you're beginning to see these corporations buy up pieces of it and buy up more land and monopolize the means of production and create their own little vassal state. And it's incredibly disturbing, but also, you know, from a intellectual point of view, it's fascinating to see this sort of system, this sort of cycle occur in a digital age where we can all document it with our smartphones and talk about it on YouTube channels like this. It's fascinating. All right, guys, let's go on here. The extreme privatization of jurisprudence overlaps the privatization of public services, but it is more sinister. When a public service such as a voucher school, a park, a highway, or an entire town, like we were just talking about, such as Disney's Town of Celebration, is privatized, it alters the cost, quality, and distribution of the service. It also reduces public accountability. Voucher schools are able to manipulate admissions, avoid costly special needs kids, and have their own legal and disciplinary procedures, which are supervised only very loosely by the state, if at all. Public prisons, already replete with abhorrent conditions, have become much worse as private, for-profit entities with even less opportunity for redress. And that's the thing here I want to touch on as well. Particularly segueing from the public prisons being made private. I mean, there is no clearer connection or parallel to the now developing Neo-Feudalism in the Middle Ages feudalism that existed as a private prison. I mean, really, the private prison system is essentially an extension of the slave-holding plantations of antebellum America. I mean, if you look at the way they're operated, like giant slave labor camps, you know, they'll work the fields as migrant workers. They'll put out fires. They'll do all this stuff. I mean, that's the clearest example I can think of a neo fiefdom. But, you know, going along with the justice system, the private prison system being operated essentially as a fiefdom. You know, the vassal states, they had, you know, knights and warriors and administrators to protect them and organize the feudal system. And really, we have the same thing. I mean, what is a private security agency if not a band of military men for hire by the vassal corporation of whatever fiefdom they have? That's what these private military mercenary contractors like Blackwater are. For hire military services to the highest bidder, to whichever feudal lord has the most wealth and opportunity for the armed men. And when you start looking at some of these parallels, it becomes extremely disturbing. And you can wonder where it's heading. I mean, as the privatization and the creation of this neo-feudalism continues, I mean, we already, to a degree, have a caste system where there's the workers, which are the peasants, you know, the police and the army, which are like the knights and the warriors of the Middle Ages. And then, you know, the bankers and the and the financiers and the corporatists are the kings in the church and things like that. I mean, and I understand, like, maybe I'm making some loose assumptions here, but it's an interesting intellectual or mental exercise to kind of play these things out in your head and to envision these parallels side by side like this. And, as you see these things continue, as you see this feudal caste system continue to cement itself as the American empire continues to decay. And you see, like, with that first article we read with Amazon, the factory towns, where they're moving them all out of the city and they're going to have everything that the worker needs in these little towns. I mean, just like in the Middle Ages and the feudalism of the Middle Ages, you see a world where, due to economic conditions and conditions of employment, the modern-day wage slave, the modern-day worker, whose parallel is the peasant, the serf, just like the serf, is tied inexorably to land. And there is no way out or up from that position. All right, guys, let's polish this one off, huh? In some respects, the new feudalism is even more lopsided than the original, in that historic feudalism had some forms of reciprocal obligation between lord, vassal, and serf, between king and aristocrat, church and crown, and between apprentice, tradesman, and master. For all of its absolutism, feudalism had aspects of what J.K. Galbraith, describing capitalism at the apex of the mixed economy, was to call countervailing power. Neo-Feudalism is a one-way seizure of private power and law by the elites. The ultra-libertarian Friedrich Hayek, F.A. Hayek, warned that too much state intervention would deprive the citizenry of cherished rights and liberties. With unintended irony, he titled his treatise The Road to Serfdom. Hayek had it backwards. Today's road to serfdom is corporate. And I absolutely love the way they ended that. Because in college, I had to read The Road to Serfdom, and what a pile of steaming shit it was. And I was supposed to write a 10-page, college essay, copy and paste from Wikipedia type shit. And I ended up writing like 60 or 70 pages, what amounted to essentially a dissertation. Maybe not quite that severe, but I just broke down every single line of that book and how it's bullshit, especially in relation to modern technology and political systems. But I love that. The road to serfdom is corporate. And I wonder what good old libertarian F.A. Hayek would say to that statement, especially if he had a chance to sit down and read the news and see the politics of our modern times. All right, guys, I got one more article for you. And I know we've been reading a lot, but I got this one right here. Just to tie this off. Give Amazon and Facebook a seat at the United Nations. From the Washington Post. Yeah, it's real. All these are real, mind you. They seem like they'd be something out of the Onion, but they're real. From real, paid shills, presumably. Give Amazon and Facebook a seat at the United Nations. As if it weren't enough, we're going to have corporate fiefdoms. We've got this. It's not enough for them to have their little fiefdoms and their cosplaying of the medieval feudalist world. Maybe this has been going on longer than we thought. We've already had fiefdoms for a while. Now they're taking the next step to outright nationhood. And I'm sure this will all work out fine with Amazon and Google having a seat at the United Nations. Sure, it's going to be great. And this process has been going on so long, deregulation, neoliberalism, trickle-down economics. Reagan was a saint. Thank God for him. We have an article here saying that we should give Amazon and Facebook and other companies a seat at the United Nations. Whatever your politics are, presumably left-wing, obviously, if you're watching this show, but somehow if you're a right-winger watching this and you believe in the free market and shit. You believe in the free market. I get it. Maybe when we have giant multinational corporations pitching the idea that they should have the same power in global governance as a country, a democratically elected or sovereign country, maybe we've let capitalism go a little bit too far. Can we have that discussion? Can we meet in the middle on that? That maybe when Amazon is saying, I have a right to sit at the United Nations with the other countries of the world, that maybe we've let this shit go too far? Can we agree on that? Damn. All right, guys, let's read a little bit of this. It's getting harder to distinguish brands from nation states. The resemblance is not simply semiotics. Logos as flags, anthems as jingles, taglines as mottos, mission statements as constitutions, founder stories and official histories, terms and conditions or legal codes, structures, customers as citizens, shareholders as legislators, board of directors as executives, chairmen as monarchs, CEOs as presidents, and oversight boards as judges, or even size, though the comparisons are startling. Walmart Incorporated employs roughly the population of Botswana. Damn. Microsoft Corporation's market cap is greater than Brazil's GDP. FedEx Corporation has 5 times more planes than Air India Ltd. That's insane. I just want you to think about that for a minute before we go on to the next thing. And then I'll shut the fuck up. These corporations have more wealth and more power and more means of production and more resources at their disposal than countries on the planet, including large countries like Brazil. That's a fucking issue. And what's amazing to me is how thoroughly brainwashed and beyond the capacity of thinking beyond capitalism that these people are, that are writing articles like this, that when they see that Microsoft or Walmart has more wealth and more power and employs more people than the size of the population of a country, their answer isn't, yo, dude, this is fucked up. This shouldn't be happening. This is bad that these countries, these corporations have more power than corporations. No, they're like, well, this seems to be happening. If this is happening, this is the trend. Let's keep it going. Let's give them power at the United Nations. Let's actually make them a nation state. That's their fucking answer. That's disturbing. That's how far gone people's critical thinking skills are, is not to check the power of the corporations that are as powerful as countries, but to keep the process going. Insane. All right, guys, let's go on here. If this all sounds a tad whimsical, comparing gadflies to Goliaths, it may be because of the cultural dominance of the Westphalian system, under which the global balance of power has been envisioned. Since 1648, as a mosaic of centrally controlled and culturally unified nation states, each wielding a monopoly of force inside mutually recognized borders. In reality, of course, these Westphalian axioms have always been more or less fluid. State sovereignty is regularly pooled militarily, legally, and economically. Central control has repeatedly yielded to demands for democracy and regional autonomy. Cultural unity has been fragmented by religious freedom, mass migration, and globalization. The monopoly of force is increasingly challenged by stateless terror and non-state cyber attacks, and the sanctity of state borders has been violated by the miasmas of pollution, climate change, invasive species, and infectious diseases. External defense and internal assistance have historically been the province, the raison d'etre of developed nations. Earthquakes, outbreaks, hurricanes, heat waves, floods, fires, insurrections, and invasions demand a scale of command and control typically available only to state and military and civil agencies. COVID-19 tested this truism, even in the most advanced nations, both because of the pandemic's unprecedented global impact and because the highly specialized responses it required could often only be provided expeditiously by brands. Okay, a lot to unpack there, a lot of reading, I apologize. But the case they're making, just touch on the COVID, is they're saying that because the nation state, the sovereign nation state, has failed at controlling the pandemic, has failed at catastrophe response, has failed at security, of military security, all this stuff. Their case is that because the nation state has failed at this, isn't to reform the nation state or to strengthen the nation state or to strengthen democracy or reform it or all that. That's none of their answers. Their answer isn't let's try to fix this fucked up situation where these countries are so rotten through and devoured by corporations that they can no longer function as their primary function in their primary purpose of defending people and citizens and keeping social cohesion together. It's not that we should fix that because they're failing. It's they've failed. Let's hand it all over to corporations, to brands, as they put it. The nation state has failed. Democracy has failed. Republicanism has failed. Governments can't do the job like they used to, but you know who can? Amazon, Pfizer, Google, motherfucker. These guys got your back. Take down the American flag. Take down the Chinese Communist flag. Slap that Amazon logo on that bitch. That is the future of the world. That is the future of global governance, motherfucker. These motherfuckers have got your back. They can handle the situation. Aren't you sick and tired of your government failing you? Guess what? You don't got to have allegiance to a government anymore. You can have allegiance to a multinational corporation. Fuck yeah. No, I'm sorry, guys. I'm getting a little silly with that, but all this stuff I'm talking about, guys, here, this last bit, this is the world they're trying to create. And this is the last thing I'll say. This is the world that they want, that we talked about. These fiefdoms, these factory towns, these vassal states ruled by the divine right of wealth to rule. That's what they're trying to create. And I think of Chris Hedges when he talked about the American empire is inevitably going to collapse. And he talked about two possible worlds coming out of it. He didn't envision another world superpower dominating everything, not even China. He envisioned one, a multipolar world that is more democratic with checks and balances of power between the various nation states, encompassing with democratic reforms. But he also envisioned a second, more terrifying and grim future, which is a cabal of multinational corporations having all of the power, having seats at the United Nations, like this article here so succinctly advocated for. A world where the nation state no longer exists, where democracy no longer exists, where human beings do not have self-sovereignty to decide their rulers, but rather a handful of corporations owned by an even smaller handful of billionaires dictate the entire future of mankind, where you, as a working person, are tied to the land just like a serf was, tied to the factory, tied to the office, tied to the shipping lanes, with your back bent and your hoe in the dirt, while the church and the state and the divine monarch rule over you, the golden calf as its symbol. But yeah, guys, that's all I have for you. I know this was a lot of reading. It was a very long episode. I hope I got across kind of what I was trying to paint. That in some ways we are maybe not mimicking or repeating history, but we are certainly rhyming with it. With the collapse of the Roman Empire, the slow decay of the Roman Empire, with little fiefdoms owned by the wealthiest people propping up inside of it. There are so many parallels between that time of history and our own. And I thought it would be a fascinating discussion to read some of these articles and have a discussion about those parallels and what it may spell for the future of mankind. But yeah, guys, like I said, that's all I have for you. Drop a comment. Let me know what you think about this. I apologize if maybe I didn't do the best job of getting some of these concepts across. I did the best I can. It was a lot. Drop a comment. Do you agree with some of the points I tried to make in here? Do you think that this corporate feudalism, this neo-feudalism, these factory town fiefdoms, do you think that this is a good analysis, that the parallels are not just something I'm stringing out of my head? Where do you see this trend of privatization, of developing of corporate fiefdoms heading? Do you see it heading like in this article, where the multinational corporation has seceded the nation state as the primary governing body of mankind? And where does that route end? But yeah, guys, that's all I have. Drop a comment. As always, guys, it's great hanging out with you. I'm really glad I got to finally put this video out and have a discussion with you guys. Until next time, I'll speak with you again soon. Bye.
Yes, I know.